FPL Game Week 12, the best transfer targets. The international break is officially over. It is Wednesday, which means we are just a few ways from the return of FPL and a few days before we get our teeth into the very long run of Premier League fixtures between now and about March time when we have the next international break. A lot has been happening. We are looking at the big run in the FPL season. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at a few players to buy. We're going to be discussing all the hot topic players across defense, midfielders and forwards, having a look at some new teams like Manchester United, discussing Erling Haaland, all in today's transfer targets. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here. And if you are happy that FPL is about to return and the international break is over, then definitely make sure you're subscribed and you've liked, because there is a lot of exciting content to come over the next couple of weeks and months as we enter the big part of the FPL season. It is nice that it is over and we're going to be talking about a few players to buy, but of course it is the international break. And we see a massive increase in the amount of players flagged in our FPL team. So before we get into a few players to buy, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion and an update on some of those players. First one is Trent Alexander-Arnold. Personally, I don't think he's going to be available to play Southampton. If he is available, I think there is a good chance that he gets given a rest. They have Real Madrid in the Champions League and then Manchester City just a few days later. And I think that is perfect for Conor Bradley to be given a start against Southampton. The attacking returns have also not massively been there and a couple more difficult games on the horizon. I do think Trent Alexander-Arnold is probably a player that I would look to sell. The other 6 players that we've got on here are actually, I'm expecting them all to be available going into game week 12. Palmer has already been pictured back in training, so he is definitely available. McNeil has also been confirmed that he is back in Everton training, so he should be available as well. We don't actually have an update on Visa and Burmo, Saka or Semenyo at the moment. I'm expecting all of them to be okay, really, as international break injuries. The only one that's there may be a little bit of doubt is Bukayo Saka, because he's the one that we actually saw go off with a slight injury in the fixture before the international break in about the 80th minute against Chelsea. Now, immediately it seems like, yeah, they've just taken him off, so they have an excuse for him not to go on international duty, like they did with Declan Rice as well, who is fully expected to be back and available. But there is a slight doubt about Bukayo Saka. The issue is, based off what we heard from Zinchenko in an interview with The Athletic, we're not 100% sure that we'll know going into the deadline whether Saka is going to be available or not. Trent, for me, feels like one you can sell. Saka is a bit of a doubt. The rest I do fully expect to be available, but we will hopefully hear in the press conferences later this week. And then we're going to talk about one of the biggest talking points at the moment in FPL, and that is continuing what to do with Erling Haaland. So a lot of the players that you are looking to buy in their place are Salah, Palmer, Saka, Bruno Fernandes, and then maybe a forward like Matej Cunha or Alexander Isak in there as well. Haaland has continued to underperform his data, which just means he's not performing at the level that you'd want him to for his price tag. And you continue to ask me again and again, Harry, is this the week that you should sell him? And there are some people in the comments who still feel very, very strongly that selling him is going to be a mistake. So I'm going to give you my opinion on it. You will know that a couple of weeks ago, I did sell Erling Haaland from my team, and it has gone very well as a result since. And I do look at Salah and think he is the best option as a replacement or in sort of using the money to go and buy Mo Salah because of how good he is for bonus points. A single Salah goal is resulting in a double-digit return because of the 3 bonus points he's mopping up every single time he has scored so far this season pretty much. However, we're not seeing quite the same level of clinical finishing from Haaland, which means he's often getting 5, 6, 7 pointers, whereas Salah is getting a 8, 9, 10, 11 pointer when he does score. So if you want to make a swap that gets you Salah in place of Haaland and another forward like Alexander Isak, I would advise doing that this week. The other thing is, does it give you another premium? Does it give you a Cole Palmer or a Bukayo Saka if they are back available going into game week 12? And if the answer is it gives you Salah and Cole Palmer, then I am absolutely definitely one that I would go and do. The continued discussion arises is if you already own a team with Haaland, Salah, Palmer, then I don't think you need to go and sell him this week. You're only going to be bringing in potentially a Bukayo Saka who is currently flagged, a Bruno Fernandes who is still a little bit of a doubt about whether we want to go and buy. So if you own Haaland, Salah and Palmer, I don't think you need to rush to sell Haaland, but if it gets you a Salah, then I potentially would make the swap. The other question is, should you be doing it for a -4 to buy Mo Salah? I keep banging on about this, but the fact that it's -4 shouldn't actually impact your decision, I don't think. This transfer of Haaland out and Salah in is going to swing massively one way or another. It's either going to be massively positive and that -4 will be cleared out very, very quickly straight away, or it will go so badly that the -4 point hit that you are going to take is going to be the least of our problems. And it's going to be Haaland scores a hat-trick and Salah blanks. And the 4 points that you've lost is the least of your worries. It's the Haaland haul that is going to punish us the most. So don't let a -4 put you off. If you think that the transfers you are making in terms of selling Haaland are the better transfers, but it's for a -4, then I'd probably go and do it regardless, just because of it's going to swing massively, particularly because of the captaincy as well. Now, having a look at a few other players you are considering selling this week. Just before we do that, all the data, the fixture tickers, is taken from Fantasy Football Scout. We are actually going to use it live during this video as well, so stay tuned for that to see me use a few of the tools. But having a look at the few of the players you are considering selling, we've already discussed Trent Alexander-Arnold, and yes, he is a sell for me. There's too much money for the lack of certainty that he's going to start and the lack of attacking returns that we've got. Next up is Chris Wood. Chris Wood has been one of my favourite players so far this season. I put him in my team of the season so far in my podcast this week. If you haven't checked that out, go and have a listen to it. Listen to who else we've put in our team of the seasons, because there are a few little contentious debates, but Chris Wood was one I put in over Erling Haaland. But in terms of FPL, Arsenal away, City away, and there is a difficult run, he's not a priority sell, particularly because he has Ipswich at home in game week 13. But I plan on selling Chris Wood in game week 14, probably for João Pedro. So I don't think he's a buy. He's definitely not a buy at the moment. He's not a priority sell this week because he could definitely score against these teams that they've got coming up. He is reliable and he is consistent, but I think there are better options at his price now. And now one I feel more strongly on is Dominic Solanke. The lack of consistency that we're getting with Spurs, the way he's dropping deep, the lack of chances they're creating, and just the performances they're putting in against some teams like Palace and Ipswich that you would expect them to go and beat. I do think that Solanke is a sell. Now, I actually do predict that Manchester City versus Spurs will be quite a high-scoring game. I actually predicted 4-2 to Manchester City, which, as an Erling Haaland seller, doesn't feel fantastic, but it does put me off a little bit, potentially selling Solanke this week. However, Jackson and Isak I both prefer. Cunha I prefer, Visa I prefer, and then João Pedro. I all prefer these forwards to Solanke. So if you want to go up or down, I do think I'd sell him. And the final one is Rico Lewis of Manchester City. Yes, he is in my team, and yes, he is a sell. The lack of attacking returns, the lack of certainty that he's going to continue to start games now, the lack of defensive solidity for Manchester City without Rodri just means even at the cheap price that he is, it's too much. It's just too much of a risk, especially going into this busy Christmas period. So Lewis is a definite sell, Trent is a sell, Solanke is a probable sell, and Chris Wood is probably a hold for now. Next up is a little bit of talk about Manchester United and what we expect from them and the potential players that we could be looking to buy going into game week 12. Of course, we have missed the Leicester fixture in game week 11, which was part of the reason you wanted to buy them, but there are some decent enough fixtures: Ipswich, Everton, Forest at home, and Bournemouth at home in the next 6, with Arsenal and Manchester City away in there as well. Now, I want to highlight what we've seen from them in their training sessions that have been viewed sort of on Twitter and on sort of by the media account, and what system we're expecting to see them line up with. They played a 3-4-3, which is exactly what we expect them to play. But there are a few really interesting things that we can take away from this. The first one is Martinez, who is a cheap option in defence. Actually picked up a slight knock on international duty, so pay attention to that. The other thing is Yoro, played at right centre-back. He is a very cheap defender, and we do think he will keep his place in that team. Could be a nice way into them as a cheaper option if you want to rotate them as defenders. Really interesting, Luke Shaw played as left centre-back with Malacia as left wing-back. That highlights that both those two players are back available for selection. And that means on the right-hand side, we may well see only one of Diogo Dalot and one of Mazraoui as well. And not only that, we have seen Anthony play there, and we've seen a lot of speculation that we might see the likes of Garnacho or Anthony deployed as wing-backs in certain games where they want a little bit more attacking power. And with all these players who can now play in these sort of wing-back, full-back positions, there is enough issues in my mind that I will not be buying Dalot, who got taken off after the 57th minute last week. I will not be buying Mazraoui. I will not be buying Malacia. I will not be buying Luke Shaw. And right now, the whole defence is a wait and see for me, just because there are so many players that could line up in certain positions that it doesn't feel certain exactly who's going to play there. Ipswich are also attacking really well, and I don't massively expect a clean sheet for them this week anyway. Moving forward, things are a little bit different. Mino and Casemiro in midfield is really interesting. They didn't play a ball-playing midfielder in midfield, so we can start to believe that we are expecting Bruno Fernandes to play in part of the front three. And actually, Mason Mount playing as part of that front three is really interesting, because that is probably the most similar player they have to Bruno Fernandes at the moment. Ahmad played on one wing, and really interestingly, it was Rashford who played up front. Rashford for me is definitely not a buy. Ahmad is probably not a buy as well, because you've got to remember that Garnacho is likely to take up the other wing spot, potentially rotating with Ahmad and Rashford, with Haaland and Xerxes going up front and Bruno Fernandes going on the other attacking spot. So you might be wondering, well, Harry, if you're not liking any of them, who are you recommending us buy? One man and one man only you can buy from Manchester United at the moment, and that is Bruno Fernandes. We expect him to play as one of the 10s behind the forward. He is likely to be the 90-minute man. He's likely to be on penalties and set pieces as well. He's the only one we can be confident enough going into this busy period that he is going to play all the games. Like when they play Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday in the Premier League in like game weeks 13, 14, 15, are we certain that Dalot doesn't miss one for Mazraoui? Are we thinking Garnacho plays all 3 of those games? Are we thinking that Ahmad plays? It is too difficult to predict. You can buy Onana in goal if you want a new goalkeeper. That's fair. If you want to punt on Euro, maybe he's cheap enough, but I'm not even certain that he's 100% nailed. He probably is. Manchester United fans, let me know in the comments. But Bruno Fernandes is only the real one that I think is enough going for him in terms of positives to go and buy him at the moment. So moving on to defenders, I'm very quickly going to read out my favourite players to buy, but we're going to do this in a little bit more detail because there is so much going on with defenders at the moment that we really want to, going into this period, be picking defenders for the long run so we can focus our transfers on potential injuries, rotation, or other players that we want in the explosive part in our midfield and forward line. In terms of the cheaper defenders, Lewis Hall is number 1. I don't think he's perfect. I don't think the clean sheets are actually that great. Dan Burn is actually suspended for this game as well, which I don't see anyone mentioning, but his attacking data is not bad, and if you can rotate him, I think he's worth a shout. Anderson at Fulham is a really nice 4.3 option. You could also look at Konza, who is a similar price at Aston Villa. The upcoming fixtures, if you can rotate them, are very nice, and then I've gone with Van Hecke in as my number 3 pick. I would go with him just over Lewis Dunk, just because talking to people, Van Hecke is the most nailed. Estupiñán and Kadioglu have a little bit of rotation along with Veltman as well. Into the slightly more premium ones, I actually think they're worth it because you just get a bit more attacking threat. Aït-Nouri is best over the next 6, but is on 4 yellow cards. Robinson of Fulham I really like as a long-term set and forget. And Luca Dean just doesn't seem to be losing his place in that Aston Villa team. And then we're going to have a look at the premium ones. Gabriel and Arsenal are still top. They have a great run of fixtures over about the next like 10, 15 game weeks or so. Van Dijk is in there, and then it is Konate with a double up on Liverpool. I really like both of them, and if you can afford to go for Van Dijk, he's worth it, but Konate is a really, really nice option. Now, what we're going to do now is pull up, first of all, where we're going to start is with the Fantasy Football Scout members area fixture ticker for the next 10 game weeks, because when we're buying defenders, we want to buy them for the long term. We don't want to be buying a defender for a few weeks. We want them for the long term. And one player I'm being asked a lot about, well, is the Chelsea defence to start with, who are actually top of the fixture ticker for the next 10 weeks from the Fantasy Football Scout members area ticker. I don't mind Colwill. I'm not that high on Chelsea defence as a fan. I'm not certain there's that many clean sheets. I think we might keep one in the next 5 weeks. Like Leicester away is the early kickoff. Southampton away is not bad. There's Villa, there's Spurs, there's Brentford. Maybe once we get to 17, it gets a bit better. I don't mind Colwill at 4.5, but I prefer some of the others. Arsenal next. I'm expecting big improvements from Arsenal compared to what we've seen in the past few weeks. Big fan of them as long-term buys. I don't love the Timber shout. It is still Raya, it is still Saliba, and it is Gabriel for me. Timber and Calafiori should be first choice fullbacks at the moment with the Ben White injury. However, they are still injury prone themselves. There is still rotation when they play 2 or 3 times a week. I will not be recommending going and buying Timber, even though he's slightly cheaper. Just buy Gabriel, Raya, and then Saliba if you want to double up. Brighton, I've already mentioned. Van Hecke is definitely the safest. Lewis Dunk should play, but there are a few people thinking that Igor is actually better for the ball-playing system that they've got. So I would go with Van Hecke, who's the one who's fit anyway. Dunk is currently yellow flagged, and I would go with him if I was looking for a Brighton defender, and I'm not sure I'd punt on a 5 million Estupiñán, given Kadioglu can play there. Although he is actually expected to be out for a few weeks, maybe even a month or 2. And if that does get confirmed, then maybe you can have a look at an Estupiñán, but even then, I'm not certain I would do it. Wolves, you've already mentioned. The only real one to talk about there is Aït-Nouri. Aston Villa, there are a few. You could go with Luca Dean or you could go with Konza. Both feel like first choice, Konza is definitely nailed. Luka Dean might miss the odd game from Maatsen, but his attacking threat is really worth it. You could have a look at those if they rotate well. Bournemouth, the real one is Kirkes, and he does rotate well, and the attacking threat is good, and they look really nice. Ipswich, if you haven't gone on Leif Davies already, I probably wouldn't. Greaves is expected to come back into the lineup when he comes back from availability, but I don't think anyone's really buying Ipswich new now. Liverpool, we've spoken about. Newcastle, the only one to consider is Lewis Hall. Manchester City, they're not really buys. If you've got Gvardiol, you can probably keep him. If you want to go back in from game week 14 onwards when it looks a little bit better, then potentially. But I would rather someone like a Gabriel, a Van Dijk, a Konate, just for the attacking threat, plus the clean sheet ability that they all both add. Manchester United we've spoken about. Fulham we've spoken about. West Ham, if it's Fabianski in goal or it's no defender at the moment. Brentford, if you've owned Flecken, you can recommend everyone in the chat not to buy a Brentford defender. Spurs are similar. Even if you've got Pedro Porro, I'd probably be looking to sell him. Palace look horrible at the moment. Southampton the same. Leicester the same. Forest, if you've bought, you can keep, but they're definitely not buys new with the fixtures they've got coming up, and a similar situation for Everton as well. So now to have a look at a few potential forwards that you might be looking to buy. The first one is going to be Alexander Isak, and I think these are the top 5 forwards that people are considering at the moment, and we're going to run through them. So that's Isak, Jackson, Cunha, Visa, and then João Pedro. I have gone with João Pedro over Welbeck. If I was buying, I would go João Pedro over Welbeck. I think they probably start the same number of games between now and Christmas. João Pedro is on penalties. He is cheaper, and he just looks absolutely fantastic at the moment. Now, do I think João Pedro starts less games than the other 4 forwards here? Yes. There are about 10 games. I think João Pedro will probably start 8. And if that's enough to put you off, then yeah, I probably wouldn't go and buy him. But he's the cheapest. His underlying data is fantastic. He is on penalties. As a third forward, he's a great pick. As a second forward, I don't love João Pedro. So if he's on top of a Cunha and an Isak or a Jackson, then I like it. But if he's the second one alongside a Wood and a, for example, a Cunha, then maybe I'm a little bit put off that. Visa is really exciting. The online data is the best of any of the forwards we've got on the list. However, from game week 13 onwards, the fixtures do start to turn a lot worse. Their new money signing, Thiago, from the summer, who got injured, is back in training. I can't think Visa will get dropped on current performances, but you've just got to know when they play 3 times a week that it might be something to consider, and the fixtures are getting a little bit worse. Cunha is fantastic. He's so involved for Wolves. If Wolves are going to score goals, he is absolutely going to be involved. The only issue is they're probably going to score less goals than the other teams that we've got on the list. Then you've got Jackson. He's on 4 yellow cards, which does put a few people off, but the run of fixtures for the next sort of 10 game weeks for Chelsea are really, really good. He might miss the odd game. That Southampton away game you can see in game week 13 is midweek, and Nkunku could start that, and that is probably enough to put me off and lead me just to go Cole Palmer. Isak is returning to some form, as Newcastle are, as Lewis Hall is as well. Online data is pretty good in there. Along with Jackson, he's on penalties, and he does play 90 minutes. For me, Cunha is still the best on this list to go and buy. Isak is probably next. Then it's probably João Pedro for value. Jackson and Visa have their pros if you like them. Visa is good short-term. Jackson is worth it as a long-term punt, but I'd probably just about go Isak over him if you have the money. And then just a few final ones to discuss, because I realize we haven't spoken much about midfielders in this video. It has been a bit of a longer video, so I appreciate if you've got to this point. The first one is Bruno Fernandes. I did mention him earlier. I do like him as a buy. If you are buying, you have to go this week, because the fixtures in the next few do get a little bit more difficult. And a lot of people are going for Alexander Isak. I do think Anthony Gordon should be looked at as well. He's played for England. The fixtures coming up are not bad for him as well. It probably doesn't fit in a lot of structures, because he's pretty close to Brian Mbeumo and only $1 million cheaper than Fernandes, but he's not a bad differential. I've had a lot of questions on Pedro Neto. For me, it's too many fixtures. Like that Southampton away game in the midweek between Aston Villa and Spurs could easily see a bit of rotation. I don't mind him as a punt, but I probably wouldn't do it myself. And Mitoma is maybe similar, slightly better. I prefer Mitoma to Neto. The fixtures for Brighton look great, and he'll probably play more minutes than any other Brighton attacker over that period because of just how focal he is. So if you have money in the bank to do a Semenyo, a Rodgers, or a Smith Rowe up to Mitoma, I don't massively hate that. Or you own a Brennan Johnson, Mitoma would probably be right up there as a option as a replacement. So we've spoken about so much. Because of the international break, there is suddenly so much to cover. My team selection will be back tomorrow morning. We'll then have final decisions on Friday before a deadline stream on Saturday. And then we're back into the swing of it. Any questions you have about players we've discussed in this video, drop it all in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to answer all of the questions in the first half an hour, and then as many questions as I can throughout the rest of the day as well. Any thoughts you have, any questions in the comment section down below. 2,000 likes is the aim as well. I appreciate all the support. If you need some more content, the podcast was out on Monday evening. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back again very soon.